This is the thoughtful type. As part of this podcast, there is a special disability and mental health section, and some of these episodes will feature the subject of autism, like this episode where I had a conversation with Mark Chilvers, who's a photographer from South London, and I got to know him, a little bit about him, and we spent the time talking about his son Louie, who has autism. And this was recorded on the 21st of October 2019. Check it out. Thank you very much for taking time out to do this. Can appreciate you're busy and work.
Sure. Well, thanks for getting in touch again, and always a pleasure to speak to you. My name is Mark Chilvers. I'm a photographer and teacher down in London, and I have an autistic son who is 9 years old. His name is Louie.
So when did you first discover Louie had autism? Or what was the origins?
Yeah, so he's my only child, or I should say our only child, myself and his mum. And so we didn't have any other child to sort of measure his development against. And so those milestones of, crawling, walking, speaking, and some of the things that you expect to see in a child at certain ages, we weren't quite clear as to whether he was meeting those targets or not. And so when he was nearly 2 years old, he was at nursery at the time, and it was actually one of the teachers at the nursery, one of the adults at the nursery, who one day she pulled me aside and just said, we're just a little bit concerned that Louie's not really speaking at the moment. A lot of his peers, the other 2-year-olds, were starting to say their first words and, putting short sentences together. But Louie wasn't really doing any of that. And so she said, maybe you should consider, visiting the GP just to have a little checkup and see what might be happening there. I later found out actually that adult had an autistic brother, and she wasn't making any kind of assumptions at that stage, but it was interesting to find out later that she actually had some very personal experience of autism, and so was perhaps more sort of highly tuned to noticing these things that we overlooked. Yeah.
Oh, it always helps that.
Yeah, so he was 2 years old when we first visited the GP, and then we, saw the pediatrician. And initially, I suppose for the first couple of years, till he was maybe 4 years old, the pediatrician was fairly convinced that he did not have autism. He was saying things like, he's making very good eye contact, he's not kind of obsessing over certain things, and he ran a few, sort of tests in his office, asking Louie to play with certain toys and copy certain things that he was doing, and some of those things that he did okay, and some of them he didn't, but, we weren't overly alarmed at that stage. And I suppose to a certain extent we were reassured when this pediatrician, who told us that he was, one of the most experienced pediatricians in the local area, when he sort of said that he was a real expert. And he said, I'm pretty sure there is something going on here, which is why there's a speech delay and why there's some of these other behavioral issues that you're noticing. But he said at the time, I'm pretty convinced it's not autism. When he got to 5 years old, he had he went through the sort of assessment, and we had to answer a very extensive, I think it was like maybe 1 or 2 hours questionnaire about his development and his history, while a child psychologist ran some tests using play and stuff with Louie. And at the end of that assessment, they actually did confirm that he was definitely on the spectrum and that he did have autism.
Yeah. What was the change? Do you think they picked out the year after?
Well,
What do you think
the
that came down
pediatrician
to?
was one thing he did say, and I did remind him in a later visit that he had misdiagnosed earlier on, and he did say, well, the thing is that all children do develop at different sort of rates.
Yeah, true. Yeah,
and it's very difficult to be accurate with some children if it's. And as you know, the old cliche about, you meet one person with autism, then you've only met one person with autism. We're all individuals. And he wasn't able to identify any sort of classic traits of autism within Louie. But he said, when he gets to 5 years old, then we can be much more confident that the assessment that we do will prove conclusive or otherwise.
Yeah, I understand that. Just in case there's any grey areas.
Because there may be a speech delay for any number of other reasons. It doesn't automatically point just toward autism.
Yeah, it can get developed over time. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so he got his assessment, and then we were kind of given a little printout of some of the local services and support groups, and almost kind of just shown the door and wished good luck. It didn't feel like there was a great deal of aftercare when it comes to presenting a family with this news about the child, and I think that was one of the more challenging things for me at that time, was that although it didn't come as much of a surprise, once we did have the news, I didn't feel very well supported, and we kind of had to go out and search for that support on our own. Excuse me. And that consisted of, maybe going to the local NAS group, which, there's the National Autistic Society, and there's groups all over the country. And we found our local group. And actually, I found by speaking to other parents who were at different stages on the journey of living with and understanding autism, I found that actually to be the most useful resource, as well as working our way through the journey and reading up on the different aspects of autism and trying to understand how best we could support our son.
So how do you, from your experience talking with other parents about it, did you discover any kind of like new information, or would you say that a lot of parents had similar experiences with how their child was developing?
There are some similar kind of experiences, perhaps to do with sensory issues, and then some practical advice to do with perhaps using, much more visual-based instructions, maybe whether it be a visual timetable or using kind of visual, stories that can illustrate and help the individual to predict what's going to be happening in the near future. Those sorts of things I found really useful, and interestingly, it came from other parents and their experience. I mean, a lot of it's online, a lot of it's in books and stuff, but it certainly wasn't anything that was offered us at the time by the GP or by the medical professionals.
Stuff you already was able to identify already.
I think just practical ways of supporting and communicating, and then sometimes dealing with the more difficult issues that we were presented with. If he's having a meltdown, and that might be an understanding what's the cause of that meltdown, or what's the cause of that anxiety. And I think that until you can understand what the potential cause is, it's very difficult to know how to respond to it.
Yeah, because they own a lot of information out there as to how to deal with things or how to pick out situations. It's very
Yeah.
I feel it's very generalized
And you,
a
of
lot of the
course, have
time.
to cherry pick which works for you.
Yeah.
And find, and to a certain extent, it's trial and error.
Yeah.
But yeah, so initially the diagnosis did not come as a surprise because we were aware that we were faced with some types of behavior and some of the responses that he was having to certain situations that that seemed a little bit different. And actually, because my mum had worked in mental health in her career, mainly with adults, but she was the first person in the family to suggest that that Louie might be autistic before the doctors had given him any kind of assessment.
Yeah.
So it was definitely on our radar, and it only came as confirmation as opposed to a surprise.
So how would you describe him as a young boy
he's
himself?
9 years old. He attends a mainstream school.
Yeah.
He has one-to-one support at school full time. He struggles academically, I would say, but then he has some strengths, like he's able to read fluently. He's now able to speak and communicate pretty fluently as well. He's pretty articulate and has a pretty good vocabulary.
That definitely goes a long way, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, I think that sometimes you can see that if he's excited, he might kind of, when he's talking, it might be like a sort of a stream of consciousness, and so it doesn't necessarily follow a predictable narrative. It might be, he might jump from one idea to another, and it kind of goes all over the place a little bit, depending on how his mind is working at that moment.
He seems quite infatuated by these things that have obviously become the focus of his thoughts.
Yeah.
So that's brought out that kind of like energy
exactly,
and emotion.
But if he's trying to tell you a story, he might start off telling you a story and then take a complete left turn and talk about something totally unrelated, and then take another turning and speak about something else. You know, so. And interestingly, if you ask him about any details of a story that he's just read, he might have some recollection and be able to refer back to that page in order to sort of cross-reference. But he might struggle, and he loves rereading and rewatching specific scenes or specific moments from a story or from a TV program. I mean, that's why Netflix is his favorite as opposed to regular terrestrial TV, because he's able to hold the remote and kind of rewind certain
stop and
sections.
pause.
Which actually, for me, I find very frustrating, because I want to kind of see the story unfold. But for him, he very much wants to kind of rewatch something. Something's intrigued him, and he wants to watch it again and again. And a joke can be just as fresh the 10th or 20th time as it was the first time, which is, I suppose, that's something that I can admire in a way. It never gets tired.
Yeah, but it shows he can identify what he sounds like he can identify what he likes, the specific things that he really finds enjoyment. Things that are very meaningful to him.
Yeah, distinctive things that he likes and dislikes. Unfortunately, sometimes school comes under the heading of one of the things he dislikes. But then there are things at school that he does really like. He really likes music. He's very physical, so he enjoys the the PE and this kind of sporty side of stuff. He's got very good hand-eye coordination and good gross motor skills.
Yeah.
His handwriting has taken a little while to improve, but it is much more legible now, and he does enjoy writing. But it's still kind of might be a bit bigger, or not following the line quite as accurately as it should do. But his fine motor skills, which is what the writing would come under, are not as good as his gross motor skills. But he can do the buttons up on his shirt or hold a pencil and write and stuff like that. So there's a lot of things that he is very good at and that he's very capable of. But the thing that I find quite frustrating and I suppose funny in one way about people who don't know anything about autism, they see the film Rain Man and they think that describes every autistic. And one thing about Louie is he does not get along well with numbers, and so the idea that
it's very specific,
autistic, you're going to automatically
like
going to be great
like.
at kind of you're going to be sort of like some kind of savant at maths or computing, or it goes back to the thing that everyone's an individual and we all have our strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, it's like I feel like it's people manifest everything differently. We've got our own specific interests and likes, dislikes.
Yeah,
everybody has that in common.
And
what we're very good, what
we're
very bad at, and then there's but broken down what it's made up of, what the substance is. It's filled with different things depending on what that person is attached to. So whatever Louie likes and dislikes, it's things he is.
And so as a parent, I suppose I'm just trying to identify the stuff that he does like, and really try and encourage that, and really kind of push those things. And so, if he's interested in music, we'll get him different music lessons and find out if he wants to play an instrument or if he wants to perform, then find ways that he can do that.
Okay.
And of course, we have to help him with the maths and the subjects which he is less enthusiastic about. But these are life skills that he's going to need in the future. And I mean, it might be the case. I mean, I'm no good at maths myself, to be honest with you. But you kind of need to have a base level, even if it's just so that you can recognise whether you've been given the correct change back when you do your shopping, and you're not getting ripped off, or the cashier's made a mistake or whatever. There's just a base level, and then if you're rubbish at it, just there's a calculator on your phone. So there's ways around it.
How would you describe your relationship with Louie and relationship with other people?
I suppose we're quite a sort of a tight-knit family. I don't know if that is a fairly universal experience with autistic families. But because the reason I say that is because of some of the social barriers that are fairly intrinsic with a lot of autistic people about relating to other people. I mean, what I noticed with Louie is that he kind of has friends at school, and he's actually, a lot of the kids in his primary school are very understanding and give him space. And they know that he's a little bit different, but they accept that. They're very accepting. But he's now in year 5, and he's only had 1 or 2 play dates while being at school. He's never had a sleepover. He's been invited to a handful of birthday parties, maybe 1 or 2 a year. I mean, that's just to give a synopsis of what his social life looks like to a certain extent. But he is quite sociable, and he likes to talk to people.
Yeah.
But I think from his perspective, his social life consists of me and his mum and his immediate family. And so, you know, if it's going down the park and playing football,
Yeah.
whereas some of his mates in his class might be thinking, oh, maybe I'll go with my other pal who lives down the road, you know, because they're getting to the age where they can be a little bit more independent. But for Louie, it would be, Daddy, can we go to the park with my scooter or with my ball or whatever?
Yeah.
And he's expecting me to be engaging with him and playing with him on that level.
Yeah, I think it does. Sounds like he does. He does see in you. He appreciates like your role. You're somebody he can like has got that genuine understanding of who he is. I think there's that trust factor.
Yeah, for sure. But at the same
puts in.
time, I
Yeah.
also think that it's important
Yeah.
that kids sort of have an opportunity to play with other kids their age and explore the world, you know, through play and through that kind of innocent interaction.
Yeah.
Whereas when a child's, you know, it still can be play and it still can be fun, but it's different, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Than you know, exploring things together when it's new for both of you. So I kind of wish that he would have friends that he could play with much more, and I try and make, you know, I take him to different sort of groups and stuff, but even like I take him to a group where there's a lot of other autistic kids on a Saturday, which like multi-sports, but what I find is that, well, when I pick him up, he's often playing with one of his sort of favoured adult one-to-ones there, as opposed to getting involved in a game that might involve, you know, 2 or 3 of the other kids.
Yeah. Do you feel that's Louie can pick out the level of like connection he sees in other people, and obviously he can observe even at the young age that he's at, he's observing other kids as well, like their connection that they built.
It's interesting that at school, when I say to him, you know, who are your best friends, he will identify 2 other kids who actually happen to have autism as well.
Okay.
And I don't know whether it's because they meet with each other through the week at specific sort of breakout classes, so they might get taken away to do a bit of additional speech and language, or you know, some other sort of extracurricular class, so it's not with the mainstream class. So I don't know whether that's the reason, because they spend a bit more time together, or whether there's a sort of a connection there that he doesn't explicitly acknowledge, but it's certainly there, and perhaps they kind of recognise something in each other.
As a parent observing this, what do you think that tells you about how do you feel people like understand him, or like the general kind of awareness, like Louie or anyone else very similar to him?
People are being sensitive enough and observant enough, then they can recognise the differences in anyone else and be sympathetic to that. And so, for example, you know, if Louis sees a dog that's not on a leash, that can send him into a bit of a panic. But if you're sensitive to that, you can sort of say, okay, I can see there's a child who doesn't like dogs running freely, and you don't sort of blame them for it, but, you know, some dog owners might sort of think, oh, why is that kid overreacting? My dog's just a playful little puppy, you know, he might lick you to death rather than bite you, sort of thing. And I think that's kind of missing the point, because actually, you know, the individual, Louis, in this example, you know, that's causing a great deal of anxiety, and is nothing to do with the temperament of the dog necessarily, but, you know, his reaction to dogs is that they cause anxiety. And so I think as an adult or a dog owner or anyone else who observes that kind of situation, I think the right thing is just to be sensitive to that and aware of that, and then if you're able to mitigate it by stepping in. Or I took Louie for a 5K run recently, for example.
How was that?
He loved it.
Yeah.
He kind of moans about it when he's doing it,
Yeah.
which the other runners all found quite funny. We're doing one of these park runs.
Okay.
But actually, with a bit of stopping and starting, he made it round absolutely fine. But there was this one occasion where there was some dog walkers, and it was a little Cocker Spaniel type bouncy dog, and it came running after Louie.
Okay.
And Louie went into a bit of a panic, ran round in circles, and dashed behind some strange guy, a stranger to him,
Okay.
and looking for protection. And then the owners managed to kind of put the dog on the leash.
Yeah.
But that was a sort of an example where he was doing fine, and then it was just the introduction of a free-running dog.
Yeah, he probably didn't like it. It appeared to him it could have been out of control.
But
so
enough, if the dog is on a lead, he can just walk straight past it without any, without his heart rate even going up.
Okay.
It's just that unpredictability, and I think that is one of the issues that he struggles with, and that we try and help with in other scenarios, is when he's not sure of what's about to happen, or he can't predict how something's going to turn out. That can cause, these are the things that you start to recognize as a parent, the different scenarios, the different situations that might cause anxiety, which then might result in a meltdown, or certainly about him being quite upset.
Yeah. In the coming years, how do you see Louie developing more as a young person, and that understanding of him is growing, or do you think it's a matter of build their own knowledge of it?
I think that more and more people are aware of autism. I think there's still quite a long way to go. I have great hopes for Louie's future. If I ever have a bad day, we all have bad days, but then I just have to reflect on, where was Louie 6 months ago or a year ago, and by doing that, I can see that he's continually progressing and making huge developmental improvements for himself and his understanding of the world. The thing that's on the horizon, which is something that I'm having to think about more and more now that he's in year 5, is wondering what secondary school might look like for him.
Yeah.
Whether, being in South London, the schools are very big down here. There's often 3 form entries. So, there's 100 new kids a year. And how he might cope with that. And then, of course, in secondary school, you're expected not to find your way around the school from class to class. So I'm a little bit concerned about how that's going to work out. But going back to what I said about, when I reflect and see how far he has come in the last 6 months or a year, he's got another year and a half, 2 years until secondary school, and so hopefully he's on that trajectory that he will be in a position to cope with it when he gets to 11 years old. We'll see. And then, who knows what beyond that, I just take each thing as it comes, really. First things first is secondary school, and then hopefully, he'll go on to college and will find a job or have an enjoyable life as an adult.
Yeah, Mark, it's been brilliant talking to you. I've really picked out you've got a very deep understanding of your son, and you're looking to immerse him in various different things, so that he gets to experience, different situations and aspects of life. I think you sound like you're doing a really, really like brilliant job with that.
Well,
I do feel
I mean
you
this
are
with
helping him
100% sincerity.
getting him
That
exposed
means
to
a
stuff.
huge amount coming from you. So thank you very much for saying that.
Yeah, but thanks very much for taking time out to do this once again.
My
Much
pleasure.
appreciated.
And hopefully speak to you soon.
Okay. Take care.
All right. Bye now.
Thank you.